Don't worry, I'm gonna work to put some visual interest in the background. Also, I do need to give a disclaimer because the video that came before this one, I shot like a couple months ago and then had to keep pushing off its release date for various reasons. Just scheduling order and videos and stuff. So that's why I make references to things that are like way back. I don't know how many videos ago. Anyway, today I'm gonna get into something that I think I talked about or hinted at a while back, which is the why do I hate world building? Or what are my issues with world building? And this gets into a lot of things actually about writing and the problems of writing and what people are missing, and at the end of the day, why most people don't actually have the skills to write. So to start off, I want to make a clarification. I think there's two parts to writing a good novel, story, fiction, what have you. And that is, there is something I call wordsmithing, and then there's storytelling. And they are not the same thing. Wordsmithing is just your ability to string words together in a coherent manner and hopefully in a more flowery, metaphorical, like, it's almost hard to explain, and I sound really bad because I like to think of myself as a decent wordsmith, and here I can't even string the sentence together to explain what I mean by that. But it's basically when you're reading something and you think, wow, the writing is really good. But at the same time, a really good wordsmith is someone you won't even notice the writing. That's how good they are. So like, my best example of this is I like to say like Nomi Novik. I don't really like her stories, but she is a really, really good wordsmith. There's just a really great flow to how she writes. Now, you can be a good essayist and a nonfiction writer and be a good wordsmith. And that's why I like to separate out the two, because we use this blanket term writing and it's a skill, and then everyone assumes they can write because they came up through school and they learned to write in school. But just like with my you don't know how to read video, you also don't know how to write. And there are people who legitimately have the wordsmithing talent, which is just almost the inherent ability to hear what is going to sound the best on the page. And this was most apparent to me actually as I'm currently reading a book that was translated out of Japanese. And while the translator is efficient at writing this, he is no wordsmith. And there's so many choices that like kind of hinder the translation of the book because he is just not good at conveying what is going on. And it's hard because like Japanese is a much more flowery language, I would say. There's lots more double entendres than you have in English. And so I'm looking at it and I can sort of guess as to what the original Japanese was probably saying. And because I've engaged enough with Japanese to understand a little bit of the language structure. But this English translation leaves so much to be desired. It's not a literal translation because you cannot do that in Japanese to English, but it's enough of a basic translation that some things I'm pretty sure are getting lost in translation, and it is a testament to how good the story is that I like the book at all. And that's the other part. There's the storytelling. Now, the storytelling, I would almost say, is a little easier for most people. I think most of us have stories in our head that we like to tell ourselves. I think it's hard not to, especially if you learn to read, you grow up reading, you learn stories, and you hear stories, etc., etc. That being said, the craft of storytelling and making a good story is very, very hard. And when you combine that with also being a good wordsmith, that's why most books are crap today, okay? Because you're talking about people who are getting publishing deals. And I'm not ashamed to say that, okay? Like, no, I'm sorry. A Court of Thorns and Roses is neither well written nor a good story. And partially it's because of why I hate world building, because a lot of it is that most people start their stories with world building. Here's the catch. While most of us have a story in our head, and that's fine, that's great, everyone should tell themselves a bedtime story. Your bedtime story is neither original nor creative. It is usually derivative of something that has come before. So if you spend all your time working on the world and working on your pantheon and working on your language and your who knows what, like, first of all, you're no Tolkien. Tolkien was a master linguist. That's why he got away with it. Also, his writing left quite a bit to be desired. Just saying. He's not the best wordsmith. Second of all, if ancient peoples living oceans and continents and worlds apart could come up with very similar pantheons to each other, what makes you think you're going to come up with something unique? Your world is not special. Your world is usually a derivative of the world that already exists. It's not interesting. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to read it. Not even in a tabletop setting. I know, because there is a saying that we have, which is a lot of tabletops are just people's failed novel ideas. Your world sucks, okay? It sucks because there's no reason to it. A good story does not start with the world. A good story starts with the story. I mean, that's how I usually start. I usually start with a character in a situation and look to see how to get them out of the situation or how they get out of the situation, and then the consequences of getting out of the situation. And you have the snowball effect of suddenly you have a plot and a story, and the world usually comes out to prop up that story. So, To Private Ford Rayburn, right? I ended up doing an alternate history, mostly because I actually didn't want to do my research into how the military works today. I wanted it to be more retro. I wanted it to have the aesthetics of the 1940s in the modern world. So I know a lot about 1940s military history, and I pulled heavily from that with incorporating modern ideas. That makes it its own world. But I didn't sit there plotting out every single detail. I created details as needed for the world, and then the world kind of comes together. Now, I'm sure if someone actually plotted out the world, they would find a lot of problems. Yeah, I kind of don't care. When you get too meticulous into your world, you start to lose a story, because what story is there to tell in a carefully plotted world where everything runs perfectly? Stories are created from everything running imperfectly. So just don't even. I know when I was like trying to do like world building back in high school, I quickly abandoned it because I knew I was like, wait, I'm just doing the same thing that everyone else does. This is not interesting, and I'm not even having fun. That's the most important thing to me when writing, is I want to have fun. This comes up actually because there was a whole like TikTok drama where a girl on TikTok published her first book that she'd been working on for like 10 years. And she was declaring, that she was like a master of the skill because, she spent 10,000 hours writing, and, she had spent so much time deep in the lore of her world and creating this world, and isn't it so amazing, this world? And I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm going to set aside the 10,000 hours thing for a second here, but your world, that's all you have to show for yourself? And it was true. Once she like sampled her writing, once the book was actually like in pre-order sales, everyone tore it apart. It was horrible. She had nothing. And I'm going to say it too, like most of these stories that do focus on world tend to not even have stories. Like there's no plots when you break down the book series. It's like too focused on trying to make the world mechanics work that the story itself is like, okay, if I took this out and this out and this out, what am I left with? Nothing. Like tangentially, this is also something with like older romance novels, or even newer ones. Take out the sex and take out the sexual tension from the story, and then tell me what the plot is. Yeah, and you'll realize like these books are written with the same amount of attention as the, plumber pornos. They're not books. So why are we treating them like books? So this girl, with her 10,000 hours of writing and her elaborate 10-year plan, world planning, got absolutely destroyed when her book came out. And while most people are calling her out on it, there were a couple people defending her and saying, well, but she worked so hard on it. And shouldn't we give her slack because, this meant so much to her? No. Okay? And I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this, like, just because someone works really hard on something, that we should somehow, like, give them a pass. That's why we're getting such shit books out on the market. That's why even the indie publishing scene is going nowhere, because we're allowing these glorified crappy fan fictions to get published under another name and saying, well, anything that is published is at least something, at least you worked on it, you tried, right? And it's like, okay, there's a fine line between how like The Room is this sincerely bad movie that we can laugh at versus A Court of Thorns and Roses. God, I hate that book. But even the sincerity of The Room is not why people like it. It's why people like it. It's why people can tolerate it at all. It's still a bad movie that we wouldn't be watching except we're in a group of people watching it together and making fun of it. Have you ever tried watching The Room by yourself? I mean, if you even know what it is. It's unwatchable. It only exists as like this thing we can parody and make fun of, not this thing we can actively enjoy in any way, shape, or form by itself. That's how I feel about all these bullshit books with people who can't write and can't do storytelling. Like, it needs to stop. It's driving me insane. And this idea that I should just like validate you for putting yourself out there. No, if you put yourself out there, you have to open yourself up to criticism. And that's after not being validated for most of my life, not having people, praise me up the wazoo. In fact, I got more criticism in my life than anything else. And in retrospect, it was because people knew what I was capable of and therefore wanted me to be better. And so, yeah, that's a little hint to you all. If you're getting a lot of praise and not a lot of criticism, first of all, there's no growth when that happens. Second of all, you're probably not that good. we tend to praise people when we don't know what else to say, when we don't want to hurt them, but we don't want to, like we don't want to discourage, but we don't want to, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. There have been people who've brought me stuff and I've had to be like, well, I liked this. And that kind of negates everything that I didn't like, somehow. And so it needs to stop. It just needs to stop. Like, realistically, yeah, I even have a story of that from my own life. Like, when I was like 9 years old, I wrote what really amounted to like a Lord of the Rings fan fiction. And I remember giving it to my parents to read. And my mom saying something along the lines of, well, the dialogue was good. And I realized in retrospect what she was saying was, it was shit. It was absolute shit. But here was a nugget of something good that I could use and run away with. Fast forward, and I wrote my first book, The Chaos Child, and I give it to my sister to read, and she just rips me apart. And it's like, this needs to change, this needs to be done, you need to da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And I went, did you think any of it was good? And she's like, oh yeah, no, the whole thing was good. You just need to work on this. And I take those two stories into context, and I realize, yeah, in some ways, as much as it hurts, that criticism is so much more useful than the praise, because the praise kind of implies I might not be able to do it. And this kind of goes back to that 10,000 hour thing, which is the, there's this idea that runs around where, like, if you practice something for 10,000 hours, you will become a master of the skill. So the studies that were done on this were done on musicians, specifically in high-tier music schools, where they were getting 10,000 hours of practice on their instruments in really heavily competitive and had tons and tons of criticism and correction. So it wasn't just that they practiced for 10,000 hours, it was they were practicing and corrected for 10,000 hours. And then when they've done the studies, looked at the studies more closely, they realized it only really accounts for like 25% of the skill itself. So much of it is talent and, you know, nature versus nurture and things that go on in life. And also that was specific to musicians who can practice like 8 hours a day and become very proficient and technically good. I think we've all seen that. We've all, you know, like in the 90s and 2000s, there was a big thing about learning musical instruments. And so a lot of people are technically proficient in a musical instrument from having learned. But then there's also the artistry. So it's kind of similar to the wordsmithing and the storytelling. You can be technically good at something without having artistry. So you can do 10,000 hours of something and still not really be an artist. It's not that simple, people. Also, I don't think you have to write for 10,000 hours. I know, I mean, I've probably written for 10,000 hours over the course of my lifetime, but there are times I don't write, and there are times I write for hours and hours on end. But I find most people can't write more than like 3 hours a day before they start to lose a lot of, I don't know, meaning. Like, their writing starts to suffer. One that comes to mind was a romance novelist, forgetting which one, but basically she treated writing like a job. She wrote for 8 hours a day, and she published like 1 book a month. And these books are very short. They have no plot. They're just sex and how do you get to it. And frankly, they're just not necessarily well written. So it's like, oh yeah, she technically mastered the skill, but for what purpose? To what end? Is this really writing anymore? Or, yeah, is it just porn? It's just porn. Point is, This needs to stop. This needs to stop, this idea that you can just like practice something and be good at it and be fine. There is some talent behind the best writers. Not everyone has that talent. Not everyone will have that talent. And you can't force it. And more importantly, we need to stop telling people just because they tried that they're somehow good. I'm tired of validating bad books and bad writers. I'm really, really tired of validating bad writers.